Steve Murphy arrived in Colombia with absolute certainty. He was going to catch Pablo Escobar. 6 months, maybe a year at most. That's what he told his wife before they boarded the plane to Bogota in 1991. He was a DEA agent, trained by the best, backed by the full force of American justice. He had caught drug dealers before, big ones, dangerous ones. This would be no different. He was wrong. He was catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. And what happened over the next 2 years didn't just change his career. It changed his understanding of power, of fear, and of what one man could become when he stopped playing by anyone's rules. But Murphy didn't know that yet. Not when he stepped off that plane into the humid Colombian air. Not when he shook hands with his new colleagues at the embassy. Not when he first saw Pablo Escobar's photograph pinned to the wall of their makeshift command center. The photograph showed a heavy-set man with a round face and a thin mustache. He looked ordinary, almost soft, like a businessman or a local politician. Nothing about that face suggested danger. Nothing about those eyes suggested the kind of ruthlessness that had already claimed thousands of lives. Murphy studied the photograph for a long moment. Then he turned to his partner, Javier Peña, and said something that would echo in his mind for decades. "This guy? This is the big threat? He looks like my accountant." Peña didn't laugh. He had been in Colombia longer. He had seen things Murphy hadn't seen yet. He had attended funerals Murphy hadn't attended yet. "Give it time," Peña said quietly. "Give it time." The first 3 months were frustrating but not discouraging. Murphy and his team gathered intelligence, built networks, cultivated informants. They were doing good work, solid police work, the kind of methodical investigation that always paid off eventually. They learned about Escobar's organization. The Medellin cartel controlled roughly 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. They moved 4 to 5 tons of product every month. Their annual revenue exceeded what many countries generated in a year. But numbers on paper didn't capture what Pablo Escobar really was. Murphy would learn that lesson in a way he never forgot. It happened in May 1991. Murphy had been working on turning a mid-level cartel accountant. The man was scared, desperate, drowning in debt from a gambling problem. He was ready to talk. Ready to give up shipping routes, names, bank accounts. The kind of information that could cripple an organization. Murphy met with him at a safe house in a quiet Bogota neighborhood. The accountant was nervous, sweating despite the air conditioning. His hands trembled as he accepted a cup of coffee. "I can give you everything," the accountant said, "but you have to protect me. You have to get me out of Colombia. You have to promise." Murphy promised. He meant it. The United States government would relocate this man, give him a new identity, a new life. That's how these things worked. That's how the system functioned. They talked for 3 hours. The accountant filled 2 notebooks with names, dates, account numbers. Murphy felt the familiar excitement of a case breaking open. This was it. This was the thread that would unravel the whole organization. When Murphy returned to the embassy that evening, he was optimistic, genuinely optimistic. He called his wife and told her things were going well. He might be home sooner than expected. The next morning he learned the accountant was dead. Not just dead, displayed. His body had been found hanging from a bridge in southern Bogota. His tongue had been cut out. A sign around his neck read, "Por sapo," for being a snitch. Murphy stood at the crime scene, looking up at the body. The Colombian police had already gathered, but nobody seemed particularly motivated to investigate. They took photographs. They made notes. Their faces showed the weary acceptance of men who had seen this before and would see it again. "How did they know?" Murphy asked Peña. "How did they know he talked to us?" Peña didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was everywhere around them, in the police officers who wouldn't meet their eyes, in the neighbors who had suddenly gone deaf and blind. In the entire city that seemed to function under a shadow, Murphy was only beginning to understand. Pablo Escobar hadn't just built a drug empire. He had built an information network that penetrated every level of Colombian society. Police, military, politicians, journalists, taxi drivers, hotel clerks. Everyone either worked for him, feared him, or both. Murphy had promised the accountant protection. He had meant that promise. And the accountant was dead anyway, displayed like a warning sign on a highway. That night, Murphy didn't call his wife. He sat in his small apartment. staring at the wall, trying to process what had happened. He had been in law enforcement for over a decade. He had seen violence. He had seen criminals who thought they were untouchable. But this was different. This wasn't a criminal trying to avoid capture. This was a man demonstrating that capture was irrelevant, that the rules Murphy operated by simply didn't apply here. 6 months passed, then a year. Murphy worked 18-hour days. He followed leads that went nowhere. He cultivated informants who disappeared. He built cases that fell apart when witnesses recanted or died. The Colombian government had declared war on Escobar after he orchestrated the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing 110 people. The bombing was meant to assassinate a presidential candidate who had spoken against the cartels. The candidate wasn't even on the plane. Murphy studied the case file. Escobar had ordered a bomb placed on a commercial airliner to kill one man. 110 people died instead, including 2 Americans. And still, Escobar walked free. The DEA received intelligence that Escobar was hiding at a finca outside Medellin. They coordinated with Colombian forces for a raid. Helicopters, ground troops, the full tactical response. Murphy was there, wearing body armor, carrying his service weapon, ready to finally end this. They hit the finca at dawn. The assault was textbook perfect. Every room cleared, every corner checked. They found warm food on the table, fresh coffee, beds that had been slept in recently. Escobar was gone. He had left perhaps 30 minutes before they arrived. Murphy stood in the abandoned kitchen, looking at the half-eaten breakfast. Someone had been sitting here eating eggs, drinking coffee, when word came that the Americans were coming, and they had simply walked away. No panic, no rush. Just a calm departure, as if the entire Colombian military and the DEA were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. On the table, next to the coffee cup, was a small piece of paper. Murphy picked it up. On it was written, in neat handwriting, a single sentence in Spanish. Están siempre un paso atrás. You are always one step behind. Murphy stared at that note for a long time. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't an insult. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with absolute calm. Escobar hadn't run from them. He had simply moved, the way a man moves from one room to another when he hears a knock at the door. That note broke something in Murphy, not his determination. His determination hardened into something cold and permanent. What broke was his certainty, his American certainty that systems worked, that justice prevailed, that the good guys won if they just worked hard enough and followed the rules. The hunt continued. Escobar surrendered in 1991, but only on his own terms. He had negotiated a deal with the Colombian government. He would go to prison, but to a prison he built himself. La Catedral, they called it, the cathedral. Murphy received photographs of the facility. It had a soccer field, a bar, a waterfall, private rooms that looked like hotel suites. Escobar continued running his empire from inside, holding meetings, giving orders, living better than most Colombians ever would. When Murphy saw those photographs, he laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man confronting absurdity so complete that any other response seemed inadequate. He's in prison, Murphy told Peña. He's technically in prison, and he's living like a king. He is a king, Peña replied. That's what you still don't understand. He's not a criminal hiding from justice. He's a king negotiating with other kings. Colombia is his kingdom. We're just visitors here. Murphy wanted to argue. He wanted to say that no one was above the law, that eventually the system would work, that justice would be served. But the words felt hollow even before he spoke them. Escobar escaped from La Catedral in 1992, walking out when the government finally tried to transfer him to a real prison. He simply left. The prison guards, many of whom were on his payroll, did nothing to stop him. The hunt began again. What followed was the most intense manhunt in modern history. The United States poured resources into Colombia: Centra Spike, Delta Force, CIA, NSA. The full technological might of the American intelligence apparatus focused on finding one man in a country of 30 million people. Murphy worked alongside a Colombian unit called Search Block, dedicated entirely to capturing Escobar. They raided safe houses. They traced phone calls. They followed money trails. They did everything right, and people kept dying. Escobar responded to the pressure with a campaign of terror. Car bombs in shopping centers, assassinations of police officers, kidnappings of prominent citizens. Each time the government tightened the noose, Escobar reminded them of the cost. Murphy attended the funerals. He saw the widows. He heard the children crying. Each death felt like a personal failure. Each bomb felt like a message addressed directly to him. There was one night Murphy never forgot. They had received intelligence about a safe house where Escobar might be staying. The raid was planned for midnight. Murphy and the search block team surrounded the building, weapons ready, hearts pounding. They breached the door at exactly midnight. Inside, they found a television playing. On the screen was a news broadcast about the hunt for Pablo Escobar. On the coffee table was a bowl of popcorn, still warm. And on the wall, written in what appeared to be lipstick, was a message. Disfruten la película. Enjoy the movie. He had been there, watching coverage of his own manhunt, eating popcorn, and he had left a message, as if the entire operation was entertainment for his amusement. Murphy stood in that room for a long time after the others had left. He was a trained federal agent, backed by the most powerful nation on earth, and he was being mocked by a man who had dropped out of school as a teenager. But it wasn't the mockery that disturbed him. It was the calm. The absolute, unshakable calm of a man who seemed to exist in a different reality than everyone else. A reality where consequences didn't apply, where fear flowed only in one direction, where the rules were whatever he decided they were. The end came on December 2nd, 1993. After 16 months of the intensified manhunt, after hundreds of raids, after countless deaths on both sides, a radio triangulation team finally pinpointed Escobar's location. He was in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin, hiding in an ordinary-looking house. Murphy was there when they surrounded the building. He was there when the shooting started. He was there when Escobar ran across the rooftop, trying to escape one final time. He was there when Pablo Escobar died, shot by Colombian police in circumstances that remain disputed to this day. Murphy stood over the body, the heavy-set man with the round face and the thin mustache. The man who had looked like his accountant in that first photograph. The man who had killed thousands, terrorized millions, challenged governments, and mocked the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world. He looked ordinary in death too. Just a body on a rooftop, bleeding onto the tiles. Murphy felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no closure. Just emptiness and a strange, uncomfortable question that he wouldn't fully articulate for years. Had they caught Pablo Escobar? Or had Pablo Escobar simply stopped running? 20 years later, Steve Murphy sat in his home in Virginia, retired from the DEA, trying to make sense of what had happened in Colombia. He had given countless interviews. He had consulted on television shows and documentaries. He had told the story of the hunt for Pablo Escobar more times than he could count. But there was one thing he rarely talked about, one thing that still kept him awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling in the dark. In an interview for a documentary that was never released, Murphy was asked a question no one had asked before. Do you ever wonder if Escobar let himself be found that day? Murphy was quiet for a long time. Too long. The interviewer thought perhaps he hadn't heard the question. I've thought about it, Murphy finally said. His voice was different, softer, older. By December 1993, his organization was fractured. Los Pepes were hunting his family. His wife and children had been rejected by every country they tried to flee to. For the first time in his life, he couldn't protect the people he loved. Murphy paused, choosing his words carefully. We tracked him through a phone call to his son, a phone call he knew we could trace, a phone call he made anyway because his son was scared, and Pablo Escobar, whatever else he was, loved his children. The interviewer pressed. So you think he chose to die? Murphy shook his head slowly. I think he chose his family over his freedom, and I think he knew what that choice would cost. He stayed on that phone too long. He had to know. A man who had evaded us for years, who always seemed to know what we were going to do before we did it, suddenly makes a traceable phone call and stays on the line? Murphy looked directly at the camera. His eyes were tired, the eyes of a man who had seen too much and understood too little. I spent 2 years hunting Pablo Escobar, 2 years believing I was the predator and he was the prey. And at the end, I stood over his body and I felt nothing. Because somewhere in those 2 years, I realized something I couldn't admit to myself at the time. What was that? He was never running from us. He was just living his life, and we happened to be in it. We were a factor he managed, like the weather or the Colombian government. When he decided the cost was too high, he stopped. On his terms. In his way. The interviewer was silent. I swore I'd catch him in 6 months, Murphy continued. It took 2 years, hundreds of millions of dollars, the combined resources of multiple governments, and probably some help from people just as bad as he was. And in the end, I'm still not sure we caught him at all. I think he just decided to stop. Murphy looked away from the camera, toward a window that showed a quiet American suburb. Safe, orderly, a million miles from Medellin. That's the thing about Pablo Escobar that I couldn't understand then, and I'm not sure I understand now. He changed the rules. He made governments negotiate with him, made the most powerful country in the world pour resources into stopping him, made everyone around him either serve him or fear him. And when he died because he loved his son more than he loved his freedom. Murphy was quiet for a long moment. I've spent 20 years thinking about him, about what he was, about what he did. I still don't have answers. I just have that note on the kitchen table, telling me I was always one step behind, and the uncomfortable feeling that maybe I still am. The interview ended there. Murphy requested that it never be aired. It wasn't. But somewhere in the archives, that footage exists. Steve Murphy, the DEA agent who hunted Pablo Escobar, admitting that even in death, even decades later, he still wasn't sure who had been hunting whom. Some men break laws. Some men break systems. Pablo Escobar broke something deeper than that. He broke the certainty of men who believed the world worked in predictable ways, who believed that power flowed through official channels, who believed that right and wrong were clear and that right eventually won. Murphy believed all those things when he stepped off that plane in 1991. He believed none of them when he stood over Escobar's body in 1993. And 20 years later, he still couldn't say exactly what he believed. Only that he had been changed. Permanently, irreversibly changed. By a man who never explained himself, never justified himself, and in the end made his final choice, not with a weapon or a bribe, but with a phone call to a frightened child. That's what haunted Steve Murphy. Not the violence, not the death, not even the years of frustration and failure. It was the silence, the absolute impenetrable silence of a man who never needed anyone to understand him and left the world still wondering what he had been.